Welcome to our mini in-service number 3 in our professional nurse competency. This segment focuses on communication as an important tool in creating a healthy workplace.
Kathleen, we've defined horizontal hostility and we've looked at the impact. Now we want to look at what do we do about it? How do we approach it?
Great question, and the best answer is through our response. And most people feel that we're not doing something right, like it'd be inaccurate or that we're responding wrong. But the truth is that we're not responding at all. In a study that I did, an informal study of over 6,000 nurses, asked if I could guarantee you in writing that the conversation would turn out exactly the way you had planned, exactly how you had hoped. Is there somebody in your work environment that you would go and have a conversation with? And all but 10 of them said, oh yeah. And then I said, okay, pretend I ripped it up. I ripped up the written guarantee, and now the person is sitting next to you right now, the one that you need to talk to. How would you rate that conversation that you're going to have on a pain scale from 0 to 10? And 80% of them said an 8, 9, or 10. And it didn't matter if they were at a chief nurse, director, manager, or frontline position. What amazed me is that you could travel around the entire country, ask the exact same question, and get the same answers. And the answers were always fear of retaliation, fear of making the situation worse, fear of hurting someone else's feelings, I don't have the time, or why bother, nothing's going to change anyway. And as you can tell, it is fear-based. So what we learned from that is that we have a culture that is self-silencing, and we're not speaking up. We're not having those conversations.
So what do you do to get people to start having those conversations?
I think that, well, actually there's research that shows that what determines whether you speak up or not is how you determine how risky it is. I mean, your prediction of, well, am I taking a big risk here? Will I be losing a promotion? Will I be losing my job? So you look at the risk. So that's a great question, because I think that there's only one thing we can do. Our North Star has to be our nurse practice, our ethical obligation to keep our patients safe. When Dana Jack did research and she studied depressed women who silenced themselves, what she found out was that they valued the relationships with each other more than anything else. And that gives us a clue. We value our relationships with each other, but just like so do fish that are in a school. You know, we don't step out of that school of fish. You know, so we're all not having the conversations in order to stay together and stay in the group. Our value system has to change, and you can't go to an education or a class and have somebody change your values. I think that what has to happen in healthcare and in nursing is for us to realize that the most important thing is the patient, not the risk to ourselves. But every time we hesitate and we don't speak up, we put our patient at risk. And that's known, that's definite. I mean, because no one person can keep the patient safe. So our voice is important. You know, even if we want to speak up and say, look, I'm not sure that you've got the right equipment, or are you sure you want to give that drug, or to a doctor, saying, can we look at whether we should be discharging this patient or not? Or can you explain to me why you changed antibiotics? I'd like to be able to explain that to the family when they come in. So speaking up, but speaking up is assertive communication, and that's about self-esteem. So there's only 3 kinds of communication: assertive, passive-aggressive, and aggressive. And passive aggressive and aggressive have something in common, that is a low sense of self-esteem. Only assertive communication has a high enough sense of self-esteem.
Do you think there's a problem? Are we comfortable with assertive communication? Is that normal or typical for us, or is it something we need to learn and practice? Or
it's a missing skill set.
Okay.
It's a skill set, and just like starting an IV, just like our clinical skills, the AACN standards say we have to be as competent in our clinical skills and creating communication and collaboration as we are in clinical skills. So, I mean, when we started our first IV, we just didn't get it wrong and go, oops, not doing that again. But when we have our first conversation with the charge nurse about an unfair assignment, we go, oops, not going there again, because we perceive it's not worth the risk. So nothing could be further from the truth.
So we need to treat our communication skills with as much care and consideration as we do our technical skills, because they impact the safety of the patient just as much as our technical skills
Absolutely.
do.
Well, how many times have you heard, you know, she is a good nurse or a good doctor because of their clinical skills, but not because of the environment they create. So it's our jobs as caretakers to create an environment where everyone around us feels free to ask us a question, disagree with us, get feedback from them, etc. And so the model that we can use is the DESC communication model. Describe, explain, state what you need, and the consequence if nothing changes. And most of the time you only need to use the first two, the first and the second. Describe, meaning just say, like your mind's a video camera, describe the situation and to check it out with the person. And then explain, tell them how it impacts you. I was devastated, I was worried, I was concerned. And many nurses, an ICU nurse said to me, I'm not telling anybody how I feel, I work in a pack of sharks. And I said, she said, they'll just eat me for dinner. So the reason we're speaking up is not because we want or need other people to care, but because we care about ourselves. That's what self-esteem is. We care about our own feelings, our own thoughts, and we speak up. And besides, it's our strong point. It's not our weak point. If I said, I'm upset, you're not going to look at me and go, oh, no, you weren't. I'm concerned. No, you weren't concerned. You weren't worried, So, it's a strong point. And then often after that, let me give you an example. I walk into the report room, and as soon as I open the door, I hear Margaret say, Kathleen's such a slacker. She always dumps on the next shift. I hate following her. What do? In our current culture, which is passive-aggressive, we shut the door, go find our best friend and say, do you know what she said? Can you believe what she said? But the last person we speak to is the person who actually said the words. So assertive communication means I care enough. I care so much about my feelings, and I value the patient and the atmosphere that we create to keep them safe more than anything, so much so that I'm going to take the risk to say to Margaret, Margaret, can I talk to you for a minute in private? And then you find a private place, and you begin with what you saw or what your experience was. I walked into the report room. I was a few minutes late for the shift. I heard you say I was a slacker and I dumped on the next shift. Explain the impact. I was devastated when I heard you say that because there's no way I'd ever intentionally leave work for another nurse to do. Was that the case? Is that what you thought? Lots of times we can say, is this what your intention was? Is that what you meant? And usually you don't have to do anything more than that. That is sufficient. But if the other person doesn't respond, you go on to stating what you need. Margaret, I need the information that you have if I'm ever going to be perceived as a successful team player. And I'll make it easy for you. Can you just write it down on a sticky and give it to me at change of shift? I was unaware that I was leaving things for you, but without the information that you have, I'll never be a team player. I'll never be perceived as a success. My goal is to open that door and hear you say someday, I love following Kathleen, but I can't get there without you. So those are the type of conversations that have to happen every day.
I think one thing that goes along with that too is for the other nurse to go to them and talk to them about what they're finding as well, to give them feedback so they maybe even realize as well. So it's sort of a two-way thing as opposed to complaining. As you said, go directly to the source.
Right. If you hear something, for example, when I started as a manager, the first thing I heard was gossip. So the first thing I did was say, I'm sorry, I went straight to the person who said the gossip and said, I heard you said X, Y, and Z. Is this true? Well, you would have thought I'd blown them away the way they were shocked, because in the culture, I'm supposed to hear it, but I'm not supposed to actually hold them accountable for it. And of course, the best thing a manager can do is not listen to gossip. Nothing about me without me. When somebody comes into your office, we play that parental role by saying, oh, tell me all about it, and I'll fix it for you, basically. But we're adults. And we should be expected to solve our own issues because there's something far more important at stake, and that is the life of the patient.
And I've also heard that these kind of behaviors, too, are kind of sneaky behaviors that like to operate in the dark. And so when we call them out and use this technique, a lot of times they'll stop.
Absolutely. A lot of times. I think you can pretty much say most of the time that they'll stop. And you also made a point earlier that they don't happen that often. But when we look at what type of reinforcement is the strongest, it's intermittent reinforcement. It's the stuff that happens once in a while, but we don't know when it's going to happen. That affects us the most. Not the person who's grouchy every day. The person who lashes out and we didn't know that was going to upset them. So then we start watching them and we start being guarded. But just remember this. Every time you feel guarded and like the need to protect yourself, then we're not protecting our patients. We can't. We have to be safe.
We can't fight.
We can't fight. We can't create that atmosphere.
Well, and the other thing I think about technical skills, we practice CPR, but we may not have to do it every day, but we need to be proficient for when we need it. The same thing kind of with this too. We may not need it all the time, but we need to make sure that we can practice it, and that when we do need to have the crucial conversation and that critical conversation, that we're ready for it.
I can't agree with you more. And the reason is that the time we need these conversations is when we're upset. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm upset, my brain rewires, goes right back to the amygdala. I'm right into fight or flight, where I'm not going to travel on a road that I've never gone before. So research shows again and again that you will not use this unless you practice it. And sometimes that means writing it down. That means creating scenarios for managers. It means begin every staff meeting with an example. We have an employee that comes back late from lunch every day. Is this a problem? Yes, it is. Because we can't have trust on our team unless everything is fair and everybody plays by the same rules. Who will have the conversation with her? Well, the most powerful person isn't your manager. It's the peers. Yeah. So holding each other and ourselves accountable is where what a professional nurse does.
And, I like your point very much about the manager bringing it up, because that says to everybody, this is something that's a recognized best practice. This is how we do things around here. And so hopefully it empowers nurses to want to speak up and to be able to speak up.
Well, when one person starts to do it, then another person will take a risk, then another, and before you know it, you have a healthy workplace mm-hmm. where everybody knows that we're not perfect. We're all going to make mistakes, but we need each other. And we're the fabric, we're the safety net that keeps our patients safe.
Absolutely. And I've understood, I think it gets back to a lot of what we talk about. We are a caring profession, and that most nurses don't behave this way, but no. As you've said a number of times, our voices have been silenced.
Right. And there's a different level to which we can ascribe to, and I think that it's time for us to do that.
I agree.
Thanks.